Hello again. The 19th century was a crucial period for the revival of pagan religion. Traditional Christian culture was under siege as never before, facing challenges from science, skepticism, and the social upheavals of industrialization. Mystical symbols, sacramental rituals, and esoteric texts served well to inject beauty and transcendence into the ugliness of Victorian urban life. Ancient pagan art, philosophy, and literature continued to be a respected part of contemporary culture, so it's unsurprising that some people sought to use those resources to help them with living in the emerging modern world, or to help them avoid doing so. A key date was Monday the 24th of July, 1854, when it appears that the first pagan magical rite of modern times was performed, in London, by the French occultist Eliphas Lévy. Lévy claimed that a mysterious wealthy lady contacted him at his hotel, and he went on to conduct a ritual at her behest, which drew on ancient pagan traditions, and involved him summoning the spirit of the ancient pagan holy man, Apollonius of Tyana. We only have Lévy's word that this happened, but the story is likely to have a core of truth. What Lévy did was rather exceptional for the 1850s. It was another generation before occultists in England began practicing pagan magical rites. Modern paganism was largely not created by esotericists like Lévy. As we began to see in the last video, the modern pagan revival was largely driven by writers and artists, starting with the circle around the poet Percy Shelley. This continued to be the case through the 19th century. These pagan pioneers were pagans in something of a loose sense of the word. They tended to have an attachment to ancient polytheistic mythology and to what they believed to be ancient pagan worldviews, but their interests were not fundamentally supernatural. Generally speaking, it was only later that ritual magicians and the like got involved. Just as the forerunner of Victorian ritual paganism was the Frenchman Eliphas Lévy, so Victorian artistic paganism seems to have been an import from France, at least in part. Romantic pagan-type sentiments were apparent in French literature from the 1830s onwards. The key figure in the development of artistic paganism in Britain was the poet Algernon Swinburne. His poems and ballads caused a sensation when it was published in 1866, with its radical left-wing politics and its preference for paganism over Christianity, although its underlying stance is closer to atheism than to religious paganism. Swinburne's poetry was somewhat ambivalent. It combined pagan, Christian, anti-Christian, and humanist elements. Yet Swinburne deserves his place in the lineage of the pagan revival, and he was read by several important later revivalists, including Aleister Crowley, Dion Fortune, and Gerald Gardner. One particular feature of modern paganism was in development at this time, the worship of a great goddess, of whom the individual goddesses of the classical pantheons could be seen as manifestations. This has become a characteristic feature of revived paganism. The poetry of pagan poets from Shelley and Keats to Swinburne and beyond repeatedly features a great goddess who is associated with the earth and the moon. This divine figure came to be of central importance to the modern pagan revival. Alongside the great goddess, pagan-minded Victorians also tended to venerate a specific male god, the Greek deity Pan. Pan's home was in the rural district of Arcadia, and the Greeks represented him in part human, part goat form. The unruly figure of Pan appears again and again in the work of 19th and 20th century paganizing writers, including Swinburne. He figured in the pagan experiments of Shelley's circle in the early 19th century, and all the major romantic poets of that time wrote about him. Later in the century, the best-known expression of the cult of Pan is perhaps Arthur Machen's horror story, The Great God Pan. Another paganizing figure who participated in the cult was the Scottish writer Kenneth Grahame. Pan makes an appearance in his children's classic, The Wind in the Willows. Alongside the colourful rebels who embraced pagan ideas, the 19th century also saw another, more sober form of pagan revivalism. Like the rebellious variety, this was indebted to Romanticism and a desire to find a spiritually richer alternative to industrial modernity. But it was idealistic rather than transgressive. These pagans looked to ancient Greece as a youthful society, characterized by beauty, physical health, and moral simplicity. Their paganism was free living, but also clean living, joyous and innocent. We might mention here two scholars, John Addington Symonds and Lowes Dickinson, as well as the mystical socialist and poet Edward Carpenter. None of these men seems to have had particularly clear personal religious commitments, but they looked into their Greek books and admired the broadly pantheistic worldview that they saw there. Their ideas could shade into something like religious prophecy. Edward Carpenter's pen portrait of the future of humankind was positively purple. The meaning of the old religions will come back to him. On the high tops once more gathering, he will celebrate with naked dancers the glory of the human form and the great procession of the stars, or greet the bright horn of the young moon, which now, after 100 centuries, comes back, laden with such wondrous associations. The worship of Astarte and of Diana, of Isis or the Virgin Mary. Once more in sacred groves will he reunite the passion and the delight of human love with his deepest feelings of the sanctity and beauty of nature. Or in the open, standing uncovered to the sun, will adore the emblem of the everlasting splendour which shines within. There's one further fact about the three men we mentioned, Carpenter, Symonds and Dickinson, which is worth drawing attention to. All of them were gay. So were Algernon Swinburne and Kenneth Grahame. Paganism was linked with homosexuality in this period. This is perhaps unsurprising. Pagan worldviews were, after all, associated with classical cultures, which had seemingly not shared the homophobia of Victorian Britain. We now move back to the world of Eliphas Levi, the world of esoteric paganism, of mysticism, clairvoyance and magic. The latter part of the 19th century saw a definite increase in interest in the occult. This occult revival had no particular religious allegiance. In part it was explicitly Christian, but other parts of it were heavily indebted to ancient pagan ideas and symbols. The best-known product of Victorian occultism was the group known as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. This was founded in London in 1888. Its leading lights were William Wynne Westcott, a doctor, and Samuel Mathers, who was a kind of professional eccentric. It was no accident that both men were high-grade Freemasons. The Golden Dawn's rituals brought together a mixture of material drawn from sources including Rosicrucianism, Kabbalah, Indian religion, Freemasonry, Christian magic, and the ancient pagan systems of Greece, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. The Golden Dawn was the first successful attempt at creating something like a modern pagan religion, in the sense of a developed system of ritual, symbolism, and belief. Its texts and rites were not so much a monument of scholarship as a work of late Romantic performance art. The Golden Dawn drew explicitly on the Christian tradition, yet its rites also made explicit reference to pre-Christian deities, such as Isis, Osiris, and Horus, and they employed cross-symbolism and the concepts of death and resurrection in a way that allied Osiris with Jesus Christ. The Golden Dawn's not quite pagan, not quite Christian character meant that it could attract radical experimenters like Aleister Crowley without frightening away more conventionally minded recruits. Meanwhile, in Italy, evidence came to light suggesting that a whole pagan religion had survived into the modern age. The evidence was published by an American folklorist, Charles Godfrey Leland, in his 1899 book Aradia. This contained the supposed Vangelo, or Gospel, of a surviving religion of peasant witches. The Vangelo told of a messianic figure called Aradia, who was the daughter of the goddess Diana and her brother Lucifer. Its ethics were sexually radical and politically subversive. Was this a real-life version of the rebellious pagan religion that the likes of Shelley and Swinburne had tried to recreate from their classical schooling? The theory that ancient paganism had survived into the Christian era and had come to be conflated with witchcraft was not a new one. It went back to the 1820s. By the time that Aradia came out, it was far from being a new idea. Seen in that context, the Vangelo seemed to confirm a contemporary theory quite neatly. Too neatly. We can be quite sure that the Vangelo isn't really the sacred text of a surviving revolutionary pagan witch religion. Nothing else like it has ever been found, in Italy or elsewhere. It probably incorporates genuine popular traditions. Aradia was a genuine figure from European folklore, but it seems to have been improved to pander to ideas that were fashionable at the time. Revived paganism was a growing reality in 19th century Europe. An increasing number of people who were looking for an alternative to Christianity and to secular modernity were finding it in the resources of ancient polytheistic traditions. Some of them composed poems and artworks, while others performed rituals to invoke pagan gods. Paganism was close to being reinvented as a mass movement, but it was not quite there yet. That was to happen in the 20th century. If you want to learn more about the subject of pagan revivals, you may like to buy this book, which is out in October and currently open for pre-order. Paganism Persisting, from Exeter University Press, which I wrote with the historian Francis Young. It's available from the usual outlets.